Good evening, everyone. I think it's now people is join us. I will wait a little bit for start with this presentation. So first of all, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Ana Garcia. I'm part of the lab team here in IVF-Life Alicante. It's a pleasure for me to be here today with all of you trying to introduce this topic, which I think it's quite interesting, in vitro embryo development, the importance of reaching blastocyst stage. Let's wait a little bit more and I will start with the presentation. I would like to encourage all of you to make as many questions as you have, and I will try to answer all of them at the end of this presentation. So I hope you can hear me properly and see these views as well. So I have divided this presentation in three main parts, in which I expect to cover and answer all the possible questions you may have with regards of the blastocyst culture. So first, I will mainly focus on the parameters we use for embryo selection. Then I will explain how things have changed in the past years to allow blastocyst culture in vitro. And finally, I will show some examples of clinical cases that we can find in our labs. So as I say again, please feel free to ask any questions during the presentation and I will answer them. So let's start with this. So when we talk about embryo selection, there are three main markers to assess. These are the embryo morphology, the embryo kinetics, and the embryo genetics. The morphological criteria is the most commonly used, and it is essential to evaluate embryo quality. The kinetic criteria talks about the timing the divisions are taking place. And when we mix these both together, we obtain the morphokinetic criteria, in which we take into consideration the timing for the divisions to take place and the quality of the embryos at some specific point of their development. I will give you more details about how this is evaluated in our laboratory later on. Then we also have the embryo genetics, in which in the latest years has become quite important when talking about embryo selection. By analyzing the embryo genetics, we're able to know if the embryo is chromosomically normal, which will increase the chances of obtaining a positive pregnancy in a shorter period of time. So in this slide, you can see the timing for embryo development. Day 0 or time 0 will be when the spermatozoa is fused with the oocytes. 17, 18 hours after this union takes place, we will consider it as day 1. At day 1, we will see if these oocytes has fertilized or not, and if the fertilization we can see is normal or abnormal fertilization. So normally at this stage, we contact the patients to inform them about the number of eggs that were retrieved on the egg collection, the number of mature ones, and the ones that has been successfully fertilized. This will be the number of embryos that we will follow during the development on the days they are in culture here with us. Day 2 will take place at 41, 45 hours post-insemination. Here at this point, we already observe some embryo cleavage, and we see a certain number of cells and different fragmentation rate depending on the embryos. Day 3 happens at more or less 70 hours post-insemination. And one thing I would like to point out at this point is that these timings are different depending on the culture media that is used and the environment conditions. So each lab sets these timings depending on what they consider or what we consider our standards. Then we have day 4. This happens 94, 98 hours post-insemination, and here we have the model stage. And day 5 and 6, where the range is wider because we can analyze this particular structure known as blastocysts, and the time frame can vary between 110 hours, 134 hours. For the morphological assessment on day 2 and day 3 of development, we classify the embryos considering the number of cells and the percentage of fragmentation they have. It is considered an optimal development to have 4 or 5 cells on day 2 and 7 or 8 cells for day 3. So the fragmentation rate goes from 1 to 5, being 1, 0% of fragmentation, no fragmentation at all, to less than 10% of fragmentation, grade 3 between 10 and 25% of fragmentation, grade 4, 25 to 50, and grade 5 to a fragmentation rate about 50%. So we normally get a lot of questions regarding these fragments when we talk about embryo quality, what they are, what they came from. So basically the cells, when they split, sometimes they release remains, cell debris with no nucleus that they don't need. And what happens here is that as much fragments released, the more difficult it is for the embryo to keep developing until the blastocyst stage, which is the current structure that can deal in a pregnancy. So this means that if we have an embryo which is fragmented or with a 2% of fragmentation on day 2, I don't have any chances to become pregnant. No, that's not true at all. So we will consider embryos with a grade 1 or 2 of fragmentation as good quality embryos, grade 3 and 4 medium quality embryos, and day 5 bad quality embryos. But what happens on the embryos is that sometimes when they release these fragments is because they're trying to correct themselves. And what they do is to avoid parts that they don't really need. And they manage to form this blastocyst structure even though they were fragmented on previous days. But of course, we need this as quality control for us in order to classify the embryos on these earlier stages. So once we arrive to day 5 or 6 of development, we will be able to see a completely different structure named as blastocysts. So this structure is more organized and complex. It is possible to define 3 main parts: the trophectoderm, which is a layer of cells that will become the placenta, the internal cell mass, which will be the embryo, and then we also have this pellucid zone, which surrounds the oocyte from the beginning, and so does with the embryo. And this zone will become thinner and break up, so the embryo can come out and implant in the endometrium. So how do we classify the embryos when they are in the blastocyst stage? We mainly use 3 different markers to assess the morphology at this point: the expansion rate, the quality of the internal cell mass, and the trophectoderm quality. So the expansion rate refers at how big the blastocyst is, from 1 to 6, being 6 when the pellucid zone has broken and the embryo is completely outside the membrane. We call this case a hatched embryo. Then for the inner cell mass and trophectoderms, we use letters going from A for the best quality to D for the worst. Okay. In our lab, embryos graded as A or B will be transferred or cryopreserved always, and embryos with a grade D will be discarded. In the C category, there will be a wide range of subcategories, and the final decision may vary. So here it is important to point out that different labs have different criteria and can be more or less strict when classifying the embryo. And of course, this is just a simplification, and embryos are truly a little bit more complex. So at the end, it is important to trust in our decision as a specialist and not compare with other patient situation or previous cycle in different clinics, which will be probably not the same for the grading. And the last marker to consider when talking about embryo selection will be the embryo genetics. When we talk about embryo morphology and timings, it's something we can actually see and quite easy to classify. But even if everything looks okay on the embryo's development, it is possible that the embryos are not chromosomically normal. So they can have some sort of chromosomal problem, which is not visible in any way. But luckily, we can analyze this by PGTA. So the pre-implantational genetic testing will identify the number of chromosomes the embryos have, and then we can classify them between normal or abnormal embryos, which will be euploid for normal and aneuploid for the abnormal embryos. So if you look at this graph, the percentage of euploidy at 35, 36 years dramatically decreases. With the genetic selection, we can choose chromosomically normal embryos to transfer and then avoid transfers of embryos which may not be euploid. By doing this, we reduce the number of transfers and prevent to transfer embryos which will lead to a negative pregnancy or even a miscarriage. And here the question normally is how this is done in the lab or if this can affect the embryo quality. So to perform the biopsy, we need to have an expanded blastocyst. We need this structure big enough to take some cells out from the trophectoderm without harming the embryo. In this case, here we do it with a laser that helps to cut the trophectoderm cells, and then we send this little piece to our genetic lab to analyze. Once we finish with the biopsy, we will cryopreserve the embryo until we have the report from the genetic lab, which in our case usually takes between 10 and 20 days. Then with this information, we can plan next steps for either the following embryo transfer or to perform a different cycle. We will wait until we get the results. So this will be mostly the part of embryo selection. These are the parameters we use to select the embryos. And now I'm going to talk about culture conditions. So talking about culture conditions is important because they have changed a little bit in the last years, and that's what have allowed us to do culture until day 5 and 6 of development. So the improvements in the composition of the culture media, along with the appearance of incubators that work with humidified, low oxygen conditions, meant a better scenario for the embryos to culture until day 5 and 6. The media now lasts longer, which avoids the disruption of the embryos during their culture days. Together with also the presence of time-lapse incubators, which we have in our clinics, these kind of incubators provide a stable environment for culture conditions. They have individual chambers for each patient and take pictures of the embryos every 5 minutes. With this information, we can analyze the morphokinetic of the embryo and consider synchrony of cell division, cell cycle duration, and direct cleavages. These markers help us to predict the implantation potential, and we can make a better embryo selection when taking in consideration all this information. And now we will go to some examples that I hope you like. when we talk about embryo development, there's some key events that will affect the course of the cycle. And that's something we need to consider. From the number of eggs we will obtain on the egg collection, just the mature ones can be used for fertilization. Here we need to consider that not all of them will fertilize correctly, and some will probably not become even embryos. They will not activate. That will be the first key point on our cycle, the oocyte activation. During the first days of development, the embryo is using the oocyte metabolism to develop, whereas the main factor starts to appear on day 3. A failure on the activation of the sperm could also deal in a no blastocyst stage. So this will be the second event we will need also to consider during our cycle. So altogether, it is normal to see a decrease on the number of embryos available from the very first day until day 6 or the day we finish the cycle on the lab as we move forward in the development. So the importance of reaching blastocyst stage in this part is supported by a better embryo selection, which we have already seen that increases the pregnancy rates from 30 to 65% when moving from day 3 transfer to day 5 transfer. This selection encourages to perform single embryo transfer, which have decreased the multiple pregnancy rates. And long culture have also avoided to transfer embryos which will not divide further in the development. And also, which is very important in some cases, it will also help to understand failed cycles by giving the opportunity to obtain more information with regards of the embryo quality. So in order to do this presentation a little bit more easy to understand, I would like to show you some examples that we have in our lab. So for example, for this patient, the day after the egg collection, we had 9 oocytes that were correctly fertilized. They were in our time-lapse incubator, so we were able to see the follow divisions. On day 2, all the embryos divide properly, and these are the embryo qualities that we can see on day 3. So we have 6 embryos with A quality, 1 grade as a B, and 2 more embryos grade with C quality. What happens if we have to do a day 3 embryo transfer? So, well, as I say, there's a timing and the fragmentation which will help me to select the best embryo to transfer at this point. But still, there are 6 embryos graded as an A, so it will be not an easy decision to make. But if we go to day 5 transfer, this decision becomes easier. We get much more information at this stage. Some of the embryos that had good quality on day 3 did not manage to get to the blastocyst stage. And from the ones that did, we can now rank them and decide which will be our priority for transfer. In this case, we will freeze 3 of them and then transfer the last one in this example. I will show you another example. For this woman, we had 4 embryos that were correctly fertilized on day 1, which divide properly and were classified as 1 quality A embryo, 2 embryos classified with B, and 1 embryo classified as a C. So if we now decide to perform a transfer on day 3, there's no discussion for me. I will transfer the embryo classified as an A, the number 3 in this case. But what happens if we let these embryos grow until day 5? So even if they had a good quality on day 3, when we kept them in culture until day 5, none of them become blastocysts. So these are 2 examples that I think really help to understand why we strongly recommend move to a day 5 culture transfer or cryopreservation of the embryos because it provides really relevant and important information when we talk about embryo selection. I have added to this presentation a couple of videos that I hope you can actually see. So they are hopefully synchronized. One of them is moving, the other one is not yet. So this will be beginning of day 1 of embryo development. We have here, we can see 2 dots in these embryos. That will be the prenucleus. And if we have 2 of them, that means that the egg has been correctly fertilized. So the embryos, as I say, start dividing on day 2. Now they have 2 cells. They move them for 4 cells. We can see some fragments, all of them, but the fragmentation rate in this example is nothing to worry about. The quality of the embryos in general is quite good. This will be beginning of day 3. We have 5, 6, 7, 8 cells, and still low fragmentation rate in both of them. There will be a difference now on this video. I think you can spot it there. We make an assisted hatching in the membrane of the embryo. So this is something we do in PGTA cases to help the embryo to grow outside this membrane. So this at this point will be beginning of day 4. On here we have made this little hole. In day 4, what we aim to see is this modular structure. All the cells need to compact again, and we can see this structure. And this will be the beginning of day 5 to both of them. We can see that one of them is starting to become and form this blastocyst structure, whereas the other keeps being modular. You can see too, like this embryo is growing, and the video has already stopped. And the other one has degenerated. So if we compare these 2 videos, the development of the embryos on the early stages has been practically the same. But once they reach the day 4, one of them has managed to become this blastocyst, and the other has just degenerated. Okay. So I would like to conclude this presentation making special relevant to the point that what are the advantages of culture of day 5 embryos. So first of all, a better embryo selection. Extended culture on day 5 of development provides much more information about the real quality of the embryos and their implantation potential. Thanks to embryo culture at the blastocyst stage, we can establish whether the failure to become pregnant was due to an embryo being blocked, for example, before reaching the blastocyst stage, or if we can see that the embryos reach the blastocyst stage, but the quality is not good enough. Second, we can also avoid to transfer embryos that will have been blocked and therefore we have not given rise to a pregnancy. And because we have selected better the embryos, we will move to single embryo transfer, which will reduce the rate of multiple pregnancies and the risk involved in all of them. Furthermore, the synchrony between the embryos and the endometrium will mimic more the natural conditions, offering a better choice for the embryo to implant. Just to remember that the blastocysts will reach the endometrium, whereas on day 3, our embryos will be still on their way to the endometrium on the tubes. Also, even if a cycle fails, the information obtained will be useful for planning future steps. So altogether, reaching the blastocyst stage will help to make a better embryo selection and increase the treatment success rates. So that's all for my presentation. I hope you have enjoyed it. and you find it interesting. And I'm going to try to answer some of your questions. That I think there's quite a lot of them. So let's see. Okay, after biopsy, the same embryo can repeat itself, and could it be transferable? So once we biopsy the embryo, we cryopreserve the embryo because that's done on day 5 or day 6. So normally the embryos, it is weird that we have a culture longer than day 5 or 6 on our incubators. Sometimes in very special cases, we can have embryos here until day 7. But if the embryos has not reached and formed this structure on day 6, sorry, they will not normally do it until on day 7. So what happens after the biopsy is that we cryopreserve the embryos. And if the results, once the embryo is cryopreserved, there's no change at all on the embryos. Once we thaw the embryo, it's because we know it's chromosomally normal and we are gonna transfer it straight away. Okay. Okay. Could you explain more about the evaluation and in blastocyst state? Yes, so we will have, once you arrive to this clinic, you will get and you perform a cycle. You will get a grade from the embryos that we have cryopreserved or transferred. This grade will be first a number that goes from 1 to 6, being 6 a fully hatched embryo. Normally, we used to freeze or transfer embryos going from 3 to 5 or 6. If we have an embryo grade as a 1 or 2, doesn't mean that the quality of the embryo is worse. It just means that it is early on the development. So we normally keep it until day 6, if this happens on day 5. And then 2 letters. Each letter will represent, the first letter will represent the quality of the cell inner mass, and the second letter will represent the quality of the defect of it. Okay, so it can be, for example, a 5AA, that will be one of the greatest grades we can obtain here, or 4BC, 3BC, 3AB, it can be all this range of qualities. Okay. Does the need for TISA affect the ability to reach blastocyst stage in cases of azoospermia? So yes, as I explained it, one of the factors that will affect the embryo development will be the activation of the sperm cells. So in cases where the sperm factor or the sperm quality is not good enough, we can see that all the embryos stopped on day 3. And when we perform a TISA, in cases of the azoospermia, it's because there's no sperm on the fresh sample, and we need to perform a TISA in order to find some sperm cells on the testicles. So that's why we will do a TISA in there, and it can affect the sperm factor. The male factor can also affect the embryo quality, of course. In order to freeze an embryo, does it need to reach blastocyst stage? It does not need to reach blastocyst stage. We can also perform a cryopreservation of the embryos on day 3. That's something we can do. It's not mandatory to do a cryopreservation of the embryos on day 5. But we strongly recommend it because of the different reasons I have given you today, to go to day 5 transfer or cryopreservation of the embryos, culture of the embryos, because we will get much more information if we move to that point. But of course, we can also freeze or transfer the embryos on day 3. Is a fresh or frozen transfer preferred? There's no difference between the results we have between fresh and frozen transfer. In fact, now there are some studies that recommend to go to frozen transfer, particularly in cycles where own eggs are used in order to prepare to perform a stimulation that will help first to get the best results on the egg quality, and then to move to a second type of treatment to prepare the endometrium with the best opportunities for the implantation. Okay. How many weeks pregnant will a woman be if she transfers a frozen embryo and tests 2 weeks after the transfer? So when we consider, we need to consider that an embryo on a cryo transfer will be a day 5 embryo normally in our cases. So we normally do or recommend you to do the pregnancy test 10 days after the transfer. That will mean there's like 2 weeks pregnant. Okay. I have some frozen eggs, oocytes only. What is the probability of frozen eggs compared to fresh eggs to fertilize and become blastocysts? Thank you. So thank you for this question. We have seen that on frozen eggs, the good thing of the frozen eggs is that we have stopped their aging, and these will be better conditions for them if we, for example, take into consideration the PGTA graph that I have shown you before. But it's true that the only difference would be that there's a little risk for the embryos for the oocytes to not to survive to the thawing procedure. Okay, so this will mean that, for example, if you have 10 eggs cryopreserved in here, maybe in the thawing procedure we can lose 1 of them or 2 of them. That will mean that we start from a lower number of oocytes, but then the possibilities for them to reach the blastocyst stage and the quality of the blastocyst is identical, it's the same. Okay, we have done studies on this, checking the euploidy of the embryos, if they come from fresh or frozen embryos, frozen eggs, and the quality of the blastocyst, and it's quite similar. It is possible to have normal embryos at 40. Yes, it is, but of course the chances are lower, as I showed in the previous graph. Once we get 35, 36 years, the euploidy rate decreases. Okay, and it's more complicated to get normal embryos at these ages. I hope I'm answering all your questions. Okay, I have had 2 failed rounds of IVF recently, both times resulting in cells dividing unevenly. Is there a reason this could be happening? So one of the markers we also assess is the time of the divisions, as I say. If we see that the divisions are not synchronized between them or they take longer, this can affect the embryo quality. All the DNA needs some timing to copy and split between the cells. If this is not working properly, it can be one of the parameters we identify in a failed cycle. Yes. When you cryopreserve the embryo after the biopsy, will not damage it. No, the cryopreservation, of course, every time we add an extra procedure in the lab, it involves a risk, of course, but we have like a 97% of survival rate in embryo after the thawing procedure, which is a really high percentage, and it not damage the embryo. Are you saying that an embryo which fails at day 5 and does not reach the blastocyst stage, if it will have been transferred at day 3, it will have 100% fail and not achieve the pregnancy? If yes, explain why. So I cannot say 100% because if we will transfer the embryo before, we will not see if this embryo reaches or not the blastocyst stage. But when I can actually say is that the technology we are using today, the culture media we are using, they mimic the bomb conditions, and they're like excellent conditions for huge culture. So if an embryo does not reach the blastocyst stage in our incubators, it's quite probable that it will not reach it if we do the transfer on day 3. Okay, there's no 100% in science, never, but the conditions we have nowadays are quite good. So the chances are the same probably. And I think I have answered most of the questions. Yes, there's some similar questions that I think I have already answered, asking about not reaching the blastocyst stage on day 3. From those men with oligostenoterataspermia diagnosis, how do you ensure a good sperm is injected into the egg? So for every sperm, even if it's a normospermic sperm, once we do the ICSI technique, we try to choose the best sperm that we can with the sample we have. Okay, we cannot be sure that a good sperm is injected, but we can be sure that we have make a selection of them. Why I say we cannot be sure? Because there's some indicators that are not we are not able to see. They are molecular factors that you cannot see on real timing. But for these cases, what we have in here is a special test called for DNA fragmentation and apoptosis, and this allows us to make a better selection of the sperm cells. So once we perform in this type of cases in which the technique will be, of course, in ICSI, microinjection, we will select the best of the sample we have. So how long does it take for the PGTA test and results? It normally takes between 10 and 20 days. Regards of some questions regarding to transfer embryos with karyotype, if there are no better embryos to collect. So this will be something that it needs to be always, if the karyotype of the embryo is altered, if the number of chromosomes is not the normal, it will be classified as an aneuploid embryo. Once we have an aneuploid embryo, we will discard these aneuploids. Okay, it can happen that we also get a mosaic as an embryo result. This means that part of the cells has a normal number of chromosomes and other part has not. So in these cases, the recommendation will be to talk with our geneticists. We will speak with the genetic team, and depending on the type of abnormality, it will be a recommendation for them to either transfer or discard this embryo. So here we have a question that there was a clinic before that advocated for transfer the embryos on day 3, and because they claim the results were better than with the blastocyst transfer. As I say, different clinics have different criteria. One of the things that it is important to consider here is like we in IVF-Life, we have our technology is really good. We have time-lapse system incubators. We have done culture, long culture for so many years now, and we have a lot of experience in this type of cases. So we don't consider that our conditions we will damage the embryo to move to day 5 at all. It's not something that will happen in our incubators. But of course, each clinic has, I say, different criteria and different conditions, and we cannot compare the results that you have obtained in previous cycles with the ones that we will be able to obtain here. I'm not sure if I have answered, I think I have answered most of the questions. Yes. Give me one sec. Yes. So I don't know if there's any other question that I could answer today for you. There's a question here. Are all the labs in Europe typically using the same culture media? This is something I cannot answer. There are a lot of different type of media, and each lab sets the preference. Of course, sometimes we try different media, but we have been working with the same for a long time, and our results are quite good, so we are happy with it. But of course, there's a possibility to change the media, and probably other labs will use a different one. Will you recommend a biopsy and a genetic test to everybody? I think I have not answered this one. Not to everybody on the very first point. We will recommend a genetic test to people who has more like previous failed cycles, or we have seen a miscarriage in another transfers, or for people that has more than maybe 30, as I say, 35 years will be the critical point on the age. So maybe for this type of people, but not from the very beginning, if the conditions are, if it's the first time for a patient that maybe has, I don't know, 30 years, first time trying in vitro fertilization treatment, there's no reason to prescribe a PGTA test at this point. I have 14 embryos in total transfer, all on day 3, I guess. Doctors never insisted on blastocysts. Can you comment? Well, this is something I have already explained on the presentation. One of the things that why we recommend transfer on day 5 will be for avoiding to transfer embryos that will have been blocked if we leave them to day 5. So this is a different case, and different clinic has different policies, but of course we will encourage to have less embryos. 14 embryos is a great number of embryos. I mean, it's a really good cycle, but maybe we would rather to have 7 embryos that we know have good divisions until day 5, have become blastocysts. The blastocysts that they have formed, it's a good quality ones, and transfer one of them, or even do a PGTA testing on all of them, rather than have so many embryos that once we transfer can deal in negative results. If a 5AA fail, is there much hope for a 3BB? Yes, there is, of course. Something that you need to know, and I try to explain this to all the patients we have in here, is that in this clinic, we only cryopreserve or transfer good quality embryos. If we don't think an embryo has good chances, we will not transfer the embryo, or we will not keep this embryo. A 3BB embryo, a BB embryo is a good quality embryo. The 3, as I say, just means it is less, it's earlier, it's not as stranded as a 5. Sometimes what we do with this kind of embryos is also to perform assisted hatching. This means that we break the pellucid zone in order to help the embryo to grow outside. We classify embryos with a 5 when this pellucid zone has been broken by them or by us, but is thin enough. Okay, so the quality, that will be good embryo quality and has good chances. If only you have 1 or 2 embryos, would you recommend PGTA? This is more, I mean, it will depend on the case. It is, as I say, we need to know if there has been previous transfers, the results of these transfers, if there has been miscarriage, what is the age of the patient. There are a lot of things to consider once we recommend PGTA. But if one of these conditions is, one of these scenarios has already taken place, like you have had already failure cycles or miscarriage, yes, I will recommend it, because if the embryo is an euploid and it's gonna deal in a negative pregnancy, or even following another miscarriage, what I will prefer is to know the euploidy of the embryos in advance. But that's something you need to discuss with the doctor for each different case. What do you recommend to get a good quality egg doing IVF treatments? If there are any recommendation on antioxidants, or what is helping to get good quality, how to prepare the body? So in this case, to improve the egg quality is something quite, there's nothing we can actually do to improve egg quality. It will depend on the type of stimulation, and that's something that is managed by the doctors here in the clinic. But of course, to have a healthy style of life will always help, but there's nothing that has been supported that we can take that will improve the egg quality. Okay, I know there's like antioxidants that are normally recommended in cases of male factor to improve the embryo quality, to improve the sperm quality, but there's nothing like that for egg quality. But of course, different kind of stimulation will affect the oocyte retrieval and the oocyte quality, but nothing extra like vitamins, nothing like that. Will you recommend the embryo is hatching before transfer, whether natural or assisted? Or hatching embryo, it's a good embryo for transfer. As I say, we sometimes perform assisted hatching on the embryos. There are different brands of antioxidants recommended for male factor, and that's something you can discuss with the doctor, because also in different countries we have different recommendations. It will be vitamins. Okay, I think I have answered most of the questions. I hope you have enjoyed this presentation, and there's no more question regarding this topic. But even if I have not answered some of them, you can always send an email, and we will try to answer these questions later on. We can also, if there's some, because I have seen that some questions are more specific. In these cases, what will be our recommendation is to ask for an appointment with one of our doctors, and we will be able to discuss your case more in details. So as I said, Thank you. Thank you for your time and share this evening with me. And that's all. My name is Anna, and it has been a pleasure.